Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We have, of course, a lot to talk about over the next couple of hours. I might just mention in the next hour, Robert Jeffress will be in studio with us, be talking about his book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, but I suspect we'll also have some other comments and questions from him as well, in light of course, what is in the news right now, the confirmation hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh, perhaps even some comments about the tweets by Donald Trump, and what his role and others' role is in terms of advising the president. So we might get into some of that, but I certainly want to spend some time learning from this new book that he has coming out. So we'll be talking about that as well. In the third hour, you can certainly listen online if you're listening on the radio, because we do broadcast all the way from now to the end of 3 hours, but some of you would have to visit the website. We have Manuel Miranda on, and the reason for that is, up until about 2 days ago, the big scandal, if there was one, surrounding Judge Brett Kavanaugh was the fact that back in the 2002 to 2004 range, when Brett Kavanaugh was working in the Bush administration, Manuel Miranda was able to find material from the Democrats that was supposed to be only on the Democrat server, but it was also on the Republican server. So some people said he hacked it. Well, hacked it would be a different word. If I were to go onto my computer today and find material that somebody else put on it, I mean, that's not really hacking. They just accidentally stuck it in the wrong place. And yeah, again, you could say, well, I shouldn't have read it. Okay, so we'll get into that. But the point was made that actually there is a perjury charge that has really been kind of put onto the side now about whether or not Judge Brett Kavanaugh honestly explained his dealings with Manuel Miranda and the information he may have had back then when he was helping the Bush administration. So even though that isn't the biggest issue in the news right now, it is an issue that was in the news, and so we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking with him. Then, of course, we'll come back to what we'll be talking about right now in just a few minutes, and that is, of course, what some people have now called the Kavanaugh ambush or the allegations of sexual impropriety, and we'll get into all of that shortly. But just so that I don't bore you, I want to focus on a couple of other issues as we go along. When we originally thought that this information that came forward would be considered this week, I thought, well, we really need to focus on it. Now we know that the actual testimony, both of this individual that has come forward and also of Judge Kavanaugh, will not take place till next Monday. There's a lot of time between now and then to actually reevaluate everything that has been said. And I certainly am a strong believer that slow and steady is important in terms of how we deal with issues politically. Matter of fact, I have a commentary coming out next week in which I argue that really the framers intended that it would take a long time to consider legislation because they wanted to avoid what I call the vigilante spirit, or the what James Madison in Federalist Paper number 10 called factions, those who, because they had some agenda and they wanted to get it done right now, would pass legislation that really was not good. And so in a sense, there is within Congress a desire to kind of leisurely look at various issues. But in this 24/7 news cycle, between now and next Monday, when finally we get to hear from Christine Blasey Ford, and between now and next Monday, when we get to hear from Judge Brett Kavanaugh, you can imagine the number of theories, conspiracy theories, comments, questions, and all the rest that will come down that says, why couldn't we have dealt with this a little bit earlier? And so certainly that is one of those issues that I think earlier would have been better, and I'm going to address that in just a few minutes. But before we do, let me, again, just so that we don't wear you out every day by talking about the Kavanaugh ambush and some of the allegations, focus on at least one or two other stories. And one of those that we have been following, especially for those of you in the Dallas area, but now it's become kind of a national story, is what took place on September 6th, where police officer Amber Geiger entered what she says she thought was her apartment, saw Botham Jean, says she thought he was an intruder, shot and killed him. Now, she was instead, of course, in his apartment, not hers. News of the protest, as the Dallas Morning News points out, has prompted protest against what many consider to be the instance of police violence against a minority. And, of course, a lot of this is because she's white, he's black, although he's really from the Caribbean. But, okay, he has dark skin, so let's at least focus on that. And they have questions about whether or not the police have been transparent enough, and, of course, how long it took in terms of the indictment. It's, of course, unclear how Amber Geiger got into the apartment, if indeed she had the wrong key, because the key was for her apartment, not his. Lots of questions about that. So just before we take a break, let me read a letter that was signed by a very diverse group of, if you might call it, pastors and faith leaders. The reason I'm reading it is because it's kind of a who's who, many of whom have been on this program with us. For example, it's signed by Jeff Warren of Park Cities Baptist Church. It's signed by Todd Wagner, who's been on the program with us many times, of Watermark Church. Signed by Matt Chandler, who's been on the program with us many times, of the Village Church. It's signed by Gary Brandenburg, who, of course, I've known for many years. It's signed by Albert Reyes, who's been on the program with us, of Buckner. It's signed by Grant Skeldon, who joins us quite frequently on our Millennial Roundtable. Signed by Brian Carter of Concord Church. Signed by T.D. Jakes. You kind of get the idea. It's kind of a who's who of people we've had on the program, and others as well. And so here's what the letter says. As leaders of Jesus Church, we are committed to speaking the truth in love, doing justice, loving kindness, walking humbly before our Lord. Of course, that comes from Micah. We speak as clergy of one blood, one faith, with one Father, seeking the welfare of our city as servants of Christ in the city of Dallas. Whether one's skin is white, black, or brown, whether the uniform is blue or that of a civilian, there should be no difference in treatment in a just society or in courts of law. The justice is impartial to race, wealth, status, or social position. It says, in our city's current tragedy, we believe that Officer Amber Geiger's blue uniform should grant her no advantage in the current investigation or upcoming prosecution. We're committed to standing together as spiritual leaders in our city against any who threaten justice and thereby threaten our peace. We grieve for all involved in this unfortunate situation and believe that a commitment to truth and a fair, consistent application of law are best for our city, the family of Botham Jean and Officer Geiger. They say past injustices are not remedied by further injustices, nor do they explain the strong reaction among some of our fellow citizens. For this reason, we stand together in our call for the acknowledgement of any undeserved privileges already unjustly granted to Officer Geiger by virtue of her uniform. We demand full transparency, consistency, and integrity in the days ahead as the judicial process progresses. May God bless our city's leaders, justice system, and citizens as we seek justice together. And as I've said before, signed by many people that have been on this program, like Todd Wagner, Matt Chandler, Grant Skeldon, as well as Albert Reyes, and many, many others. Let's take a break. We'll get back into the Kavanaugh ambush right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Early voting for the midterm elections begins in a few weeks. That's why I had Eric Eggers on the Point of View radio talk show to discuss his book on voter fraud. He has put together lots of facts and statistics that election officials need to consider. The potential for mischief is very great. Approximately 248 counties in this country have more names on their voter rolls than the total number of people of voting age in those counties. That is reason enough to clean up voter rolls, especially since the Supreme Court ruled that cleanup procedures, like the ones used in Ohio, are indeed constitutional. On the program, I told the story of James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. They used hidden cameras to demonstrate Election Day ballot problems, and perhaps the most notable was a 20-something white kid who was offered the ballot that should have been given to then Attorney General Eric Holder, who is a 60-something African American. Eric Eggers gave another story of the New York City's Department of Investigation that sent people to cast ballots on behalf of elderly citizens, felons, and people who had moved. All but two of them succeeded with no challenge or question. One of the few unsuccessful attempts occurred when an officer attempted to vote using the name of a felon listed on the rolls, only to be informed by the poll inspector that he was requesting the ballot of the poll worker's son. One study estimates that more than 5 million non-citizens voted illegally in 2008, and the book provides perspective on those who doubt those figures. The book also provides pages of documentation for the number of double votes in Florida broken down by county. The number exceeds 2,100. Any or all of these so-called voter irregularities could make the difference in some congressional and statewide races. That's why we need to pay attention to the potential problem of voter fraud. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's spend some time now talking about the allegations presented by Christine Blasey Ford against Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Again, if you've just joined us or haven't been following this, all of this took place supposedly back in the 1980s. Actually, most people think about late spring, early summer in 1982. When both of them were, in his case, an all-boys school. She was in an all-girls school, and he apparently pushed her down and groped her. I'm going to come back to that later on to point out that there is a very significant double standard that I'd kind of forgotten about until I read the piece by Jim Garrity about how something very similar, which was actually suggested that Al Gore had done and was quickly dismissed as non-essential. Of course, at the time, he wasn't being considered for the Supreme Court, but he had served as vice president and also had run for the presidency, but we'll leave that for just a few minutes. One of the questions I would want to put on the table, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or if you'd just like to leave a comment, we do broadcast on Facebook Live, and I'd love to hear your comments. Some have suggested that this vote should go on without any consideration, and I'm going to read a piece that comes from the Wall Street Journal that basically said, even though this has actually been put forward, there is really no way to confirm it, and so the vote on Judge Kavanaugh should proceed. So one option I might suggest is, do you think the vote on Brett Kavanaugh should actually succeed and continue on without any kind of changes? The other is, some people have suggested that Judge Brett Kavanaugh should step down, and I read that piece yesterday where one of those individuals, Dylan Matthews, actually said, you know, what's in it for the Republicans? Why don't they just ask him to step down, and then they'll just put Amy Barrett Comey on the situation. I guess it's Amy Coney Barrett, up, and we'll be heading on. So one idea is that we continue on without any kind of hearing, just simply say we've known enough about the judge to get an up or down vote. Number two, should he step down? Number three, should we do what is, of course, going to be taking place, and that is postponing any kind of vote until we have a chance to hear everybody on Monday. So those are just a couple of ideas. Maybe you want to express your opinion either on the phone or on our Facebook Live. We'd love to hear from you on that regard. Let me get into this issue. This comes from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, and it was really stronger than I thought you would get from the Wall Street Journal. So let me read it in its entirety, and if you'd like to read it, we've posted it. Even though you may not have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal, we have it posted so you can read the whole comments, and I'll try to read most of them on the air. And that is, they said that the woman accusing Brett Kavanaugh of a drunken assault when both were teenagers has now come forward publicly, but that should not deter Republicans from proceeding from their current confirmation vote schedule. Well, of course, that has already changed because now there won't even be consideration of this issue till Monday, and the vote, which was supposed to take place 2 days from now on the 20th, has obviously been postponed. But let's continue. The editorial board goes on to say there's no way to confirm her story after 35 years, and to let it stop Mr. Kavanaugh's confirmation would ratify what has all the earmarks of a calculated political ambush. They go on to say this is not to say that Christine Blasey Ford isn't sincere in what she remembers. In an interview published in the Washington Post on Sunday, Ms. Ford offered a few more details of the story she told anonymously starting in July. She says she was 15 when Mr. Kavanaugh, who would have been 17, and a male pushed her into a bedroom at a drinking party, held her down, pawed her until the male friend jumped on both of them, and she escaped to a bathroom until the boys left the room. Mr. Kavanaugh denies all of this categorically and unequivocally, and there is simply no way to prove it. The only witness to the event is Mr. Kavanaugh's high school male friend, Mark Judge, who says he recalls no such event. Ms. Ford concedes that she told no one about it, not even a high school girlfriend or family member, until 2012 when she told the story as part of a couples therapy with her husband. They go on to say the vagaries of the memory are well known, all of the more so when they emerge in the cauldron of a therapy session to rescue a marriage. Experts know that human beings can come to believe firmly over the years that something happened that never did or is based on partial truth. The Post reports that the therapist notes from 2012 said there were 4 male assailants, but Ms. Ford said that was a mistake. Ms. Ford also can't recall in whose home the alleged assault took place, how she got there, and how she got home that evening. This is simply too distant and uncorroborated a story to warrant a new hearing or to delay a vote. We've heard from all 3 principals, and there are no witnesses to call. The only purpose of another public hearing would be a political spectacle in which Democrats would wax indignant for the cameras while Mr. Kavanaugh repeated his denials. There's a lot of truth to that, by the way, but that's going to be apparently what's going to happen anyway. The timing and the details, say the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, of how Mrs. Ford came forward and how her name was coaxed into public view should also raise red flags about the partisan motives at play. The Post says Ms. Ford contacted the paper via tip line in July but wanted to remain anonymous. Then she brought her story to a Democratic official while hoping to still stay anonymous. Yet she then retained a lawyer. By the way, this is something we had not mentioned yesterday, Deborah Katz, who has a history of Democratic activism and spoke in public defense of Bill Clinton against the accusations of Paula Jones. Ms. Katz urged Mrs. Ford to take a polygraph test. The Post says she passed the polygraph, though a polygraph merely shows that she believes the story she is telling. The more relevant question is why go to such lengths if Ms. Ford really wanted her name to stay a secret, and even this weekend, the bottom line is that she could have known about Ms. Ford's accusations in late July or early August, which were kept quiet. If she took it seriously, she had multiple opportunities to ask Judge Kavanaugh or have committee staff interview the principals, but in that event, the details would have been vetted and senators would have had time to assess their credibility.
Instead, Senator Dianne Feinstein waited until the day before a committee markup on the nomination to release a statement that she had information about the accusation and had sent it to the FBI. Her statement, they say, was a political stunt. Editorial board of the Wall Street Journal goes on to say she was seeking to insulate herself from liberal charges that she sat on the letter, or that it seems increasingly likely, given the course of events, that Senator Feinstein was holding the story to spring at the last minute in hope that events would play out as they have. Surely she knew that once word of the accusation was public, the press would pursue the story and Miss Ford would be identified by name one way or the other. They go on to say that Democrats waited until Miss Ford went public to make public statements, but clearly some were feeding the names of Miss Ford and her lawyer to the press, and now they're piling on what they hope will be an election eve Me Too conflagration. And so here's some of the statements. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said, Senator and Judicial Chairman Grassley must postpone the vote until, at the very minimum, those serious and credible allegations are thoroughly investigated. For too long, when women have made serious allegations of abuse, they have been ignored. This cannot happen in this case. The Wall Street Journal puts it this way. They said his obvious political goal is to delay the confirmation vote past the election. This, of course, would fan the Me Too political furies until then and hope that at least two GOP senators, Republican senators, wilt under the political pressure. Already, Senators Jeff Flake and Bob Corker are playing into Mr. Schumer's hands by calling for a delay. Republican senators could understand that the political cost of defeating Mr. Kavanaugh will likely include the loss of the Senate. Democrats are already motivated to vote against Donald Trump, and if Republicans panic now, their own voters will rightly be furious. They would be letting Democrats get away with the same dirty trick they tried and failed to pull off against Clarence Thomas, which we talked about yesterday. They go on to say it would also be a serious injustice to a man who has, by all accounts, other than Miss Ford's testimony, led a life of respect for women and law. Every #MeToo miscreant is a repeat offender. The accusation against Mr. Kavanaugh is behavior manifested nowhere else in his life. No one, including Donald Trump, needs to attack Miss Ford. She believes what she believes. That is not he said, she said. This is a case of an alleged teenage encounter partially recalled 30 years later without corroboration and brought forward to ruin Mr. Kavanaugh's reputation for partisan purposes. They conclude by saying letting an accusation that is this old, this unsubstantiated, and this procedurally irregular defeat Mr. Kavanaugh would also mean weaponizing every sexual assault allegation, no matter the evidence. It will tarnish the #MeToo cause with the smear of partisanship, and it will unleash even greater polarizing furies. So just a little bit from the Wall Street Journal. That article is posted on the website. And the word that keeps surfacing time and time again is the issue of corroboration. So when we come back, David French yesterday gave us some insight into corroboration. We've posted another article that talks about this idea of how we corroborate various memories people have. We'll come back with that particular piece right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, if you would also like to leave a message, we, of course, broadcast on Facebook Live. You can leave a note there as well, talking about Judge Kavanaugh and, of course, just enormous number of issues that surface once Christine Blasey Ford began to come up with some of these claims. And one of those has to do with this issue of corroboration. I just mentioned a minute ago this piece where, again, the Wall Street Journal addresses that issue. And I think it's important to begin to think through that as well. Yesterday, we posted a piece about weighing the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh by David French, who's been on the program with us before. And he talks about the importance of what's called contemporaneous corroboration. That is, the only way you can really test the veracity or the truthfulness of a claim that's much older is what kind of testimony do we have at the time. And, of course, what we have is 3 decades of silence, then some notes of a therapist in 2012 that differ, at least in some significant details, from the story being told today. One of the pieces that I wanted to address for just a moment is another David French piece that came out yesterday, in which it says corroboration is critical because memory is unreliable. And I think this is one of those lessons we can learn. Fortunately, most of us will never be faced with the kind of accusation that was leveled against the judge. But if we ever serve on a jury, or if we ever try to determine the truthfulness of a story, this might be helpful for all of us as sort of a life lesson. And so David French says that one of the very first things that young litigators learn is that memory is very, very fickle. It's a very, very fickle thing, even memories of traumatic events. He says in case after case, you'll encounter 2 opposing litigants who speak with absolute fierce conviction about key events in their lives, and those memories will often diverge almost completely. And he said, when I was young and naive, I often thought that meant that one party was telling the truth, my client, and the other party was full of dirty, vicious lies. It didn't take long for me to realize that more often than not, both sides believed their own stories, and the longer the case dragged on, the more they hardened in their positions. That's one reason why good lawyers, when interviewing clients, ask a few simple key questions. Did you take notes of those conversations? Did you tell anyone else this happened? Are there any emails or memos reflecting these agreements? You're constantly on a quest for the sword that slays the legal beast, that is, corroborating evidence. There's one reason why I've always been dissatisfied with the declaration, women don't lie about rape. Sure, some small number of women do affirmatively lie. But as a general matter, the word lie is an odd fit for a real world where perceptions differ and memories are malleable. And by the way, this isn't a right-wing denialism. It's a scientific fact. He had to sort of throw that in there as well. And so now he gives us a little bit of history. And so whether you care about the Brett Kavanaugh hearings or not, this is just something to remember in terms of your own memories. And that is, he said, after the Rolling Stone debacle at the University of Virginia, remember when they accused individuals of rape and all the rest, Julia Belos, Vox's senior health correspondent and an evidence enthusiast, wrote an interesting and true piece about the fragility of memory. First, she addresses the reliance on Jackie's memory as the foundation of the story. Remember, there was a Jackie in the Rolling Stone story, and she says, and now we're quoting from Julia, this becomes an especially pressing question since it's clear that the reporter relied on Jackie's memory, and decades of research have demonstrated that memories are malleable, fragile, flawed. Memories can be twisted by time. Misinformation can skew people's memories of events, and completely fabricated memories can even be implanted in people, such as they weave them into the narrative of their lives. And just because someone is telling you something in a lot of detail and with a great amount of confidence, says Elizabeth Loftus, a cognitive psychologist and one of America's preeminent researchers on memory, doesn't mean it happened. Goes on then to say that she discusses a number of studies detailing how easy it is to implant memories. In one study, subjects, quote, remembered, in quotes, details of a surgery that never happened. How matters as simple as sleep deprivation can impact memory, and how even short passages of time can distort recollections. For example, Jackie said her attack happened in 2012. The Rolling Story was published in 2014. Between the time of the alleged attack at the University of Virginia in 2012 and the reporting of the story, Loftus said, you can certainly expect memory to fade, to potentially be contaminated, even if not from external suggestion. And so the conclusion of the article was this. But perhaps if Rolling Stone reporter thought more about the tricks memory plays, she would have worked harder to verify the facts, no matter how sensitive. If you understand that memory is a foggy patchwork or synthesis of events and exposures in our lives, and some memories aren't real, you would probably hesitate before relying solely on a person's memory. It's very compelling to believe someone's memory, especially when they cry, but I've seen people cry over false memories as well as over real ones. And so I love the fact that he uses the example of the alleged rape at the University of Virginia to parallel this one as well, and to say, these people are not lying. These people are not making this up. This seemed real to them, but over time, they really get manipulated or they get flawed in one way or another. So again, the point is by, again, David French. He says, Brett Kavanaugh has denied the claims and offered to testify in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Good. We should hear from Judge Kavanaugh and from Professor Ford under oath. We need to know whether Senator Feinstein's staff or the Washington Post found any corroborating evidence in all the weeks when they had knowledge of Ford's claims. Of course, the memory challenges run both ways and at the same time. If a person is going to affirmatively accuse another person of misconduct, the accuser bears at least some burden of proof, even if the court of public opinion isn't a court of law. In my previous piece, the one I just talked about, we posted yesterday, about the allegations against Kavanaugh, argued that the right question to ask is whether it's more likely or not that the accusations are true. And if there isn't any corroborating or external evidence outside of Christine Ford's 3 decades-old recollections, that's simply not sufficient basis for derailing the nomination of an outstanding jurist, no matter how fiercely they're believed. And so you're going to hear a lot of hue and cry in the Monday hearings. There's going to be probably some crying. There's going to be some pounding of the table. And all of it, unfortunately, is political show on the case, I think, of many individuals, though perhaps not all. And one of the other pieces that Grabian put together, which we sometimes have used for various audio pieces, is 11 reasons to question the veracity of Kavanaugh's accuser. I think it's important to recognize that I could spend the rest of the hour just on those, so I won't. But I thought I would just mention the 11 just so that you are aware that there are serious questions apart from the issue of corroboration. First of all, number 11, Ford's therapist notes of the incident don't match her current version of the story. We've already talked about that. Number 10, Ford, by her own admission, has a hazy recollection of the incident. Of course, I've mentioned that as well. Don't know exactly when, don't know where, don't know how I got there, don't know how I got home. Number 9, polygraph tests are so unreliable they're inadmissible in court. And again, as I think the Wall Street Journal pointed out just a minute ago, all it shows is that she believes her story. Number 8, the allegation wasn't released until Kavanaugh's hearings were over. We've talked about that. Number 7, Kavanaugh has successfully passed 6 FBI background checks. Number 6, 65 women who knew Kavanaugh in high school have vouched for his character. We talked about that yesterday. Number 5, the only witnesses deny our allegation, and that goes back to the friend Mark Judge, who said, I don't remember any of this. Number 4, the haze of alcohol. Don't know. Again, she says she only had 1 beer, but, who knows? And she said he had many, but again, all that. Number 3, deleted her public social media accounts before revealing herself. Okay, what do you have to hide? We don't know any of that. Number 2, Ford may have been have an unrelated grudge against Kavanaugh as his mother, that would be Margaret Kavanaugh, once in a circuit court judge ruled against Ford's parents, which we mentioned yesterday. And number 1, Ford is a Democrat who donates to left-wing causes, attended the anti-Trump March for Science, and previously signed an open letter challenging Donald Trump's border policy. So those are 11 to think about. That doesn't mean they didn't happen. It doesn't mean that there isn't something to be considered, which will be considered on Monday, but are, again, some facts that may or may not show up in the mainstream's coverage of some of this. And the mainstream media may do a good job of painting her as a heroine and Kavanaugh as a rapist. But we wanted to give you a little more of the story there. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Not long ago, we examined Article 6 of the Constitution, which prohibits the application of a religious test for office. The point of this provision is to both prevent the exclusion of religious individuals from office and to ensure good and wise citizens of every stripe can serve the country. Recent Senate confirmation hearings brought Article 6 to the national stage, raising questions of religious liberty. Senator Bernie Sanders questioned nominee Russell Vought over an article in which he examined a passage from the Gospel of John defending the exclusivity of Christ in salvation according to Vaught's Christian faith. Sanders decried Vaught's conclusion that followers of other faiths, and Islam in particular, were condemned according to Vaught's explanation of the Christian faith. I won't debate the theological correctness of Vaught's arguments, but it's worth noting that at the conclusion of questioning, Senator Sanders announced he would vote against Vaught, not over any professional qualification, but because, quote, this nominee is really not someone who is what this country is supposed to be about, unquote. Senators can vote for or against executive nominees for nearly any reason, but for one to publicly question a nominee's religious faith, pronounce it disagreeable, and withhold his vote expressly because of the nominee's faith makes me wonder if, in fact, the senator from Vermont may have created a religious test for office in violation of the Constitution. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes. Let me just mention, in the next hour, we're going to have Dr. Robert Jeffress in studio. We're going to be talking about his book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, God's 7 Secrets for Success and Significance. We learn a lot of that from the life of Elijah, so I'm looking forward to that. And, of course, we'll chat with him about some of the other issues in the news as well, because he certainly has been a great commentator for Fox News. I'm going to move on in just a minute to some other topics because I don't want to spend the entire time talking about this issue, but I thought I would add one more piece to the conversation, and that is people forget about other high-profile politicians that have been accused of sexual assault, where there has been a willingness to say, well, that just doesn't look like him, so we will give him a pass. One example Jim Garrity talks about is in 2009, massage therapist Molly Haggerty went to the Oregon police, the Portland, Oregon police, and gave a lengthy statement claiming that earlier the former vice president Al Gore pinned her to a bed in a hotel suite, forcibly kissed her, groped her, and a number of other things. I won't go into the details about that. And she had gone to this issue, and she had described Al Gore as having a violent temper. So because of that, the Portland police opened an investigation and interviewed Gore. And then the next year, in 2010, news of the investigation broke. Well, at that point, then Al Gore adamantly denied the accusation. One of those individuals there with Salon magazine and currently with MSNBC told the readers that there were 3 reasons to be skeptical about the accusation. First of all, the Portland police had not initially chosen to follow up on her allegation. A local newspaper heard her story and chose not to publish any articles, and that several celebrities oftentimes are accused of sexual crimes. And all of this, of course, happened long before the hashtag #MeToo phenomenon, which I think in many cases have changed the location, the conversation, and the rest. Well, nevertheless, you can go and read all of this, but the Portland District Attorney's Office chose not to press charges against Gore, contending that Haggerty didn't have credibility, in part because she sold her story to the National Enquirer, had not agreed to turn over some records and all of the rest. So that's as far as it went. But it's just, I think, helpful to recognize that when we've had other stories like that, the police have decided not to follow up on them, and there have been various individuals who actually have been willing to defend that in a person. As a matter of fact, one of those individuals there actually said, I wouldn't want to believe this because, if nothing else, I appreciate the stand that Al Gore has on climate change. So, where you stand on issues sometimes also determines as to whether or not people want to pursue any kind of charges. So I just thought I'd bring that up. It may show up in the hearings, and if you say, what are they talking about in terms of Al Gore, that I think is an explanation for that. My commentary today, just before we run out of time, is on voter fraud, and it has to do with some conversations that we had more recently with Eric Eggers on his book. And that was about the fact that when we look at some of the facts and figures of election fraud, it's really a concern. I've pointed out on this program many times before that there are approximately 248 counties in this country that have more names on the voter rolls than the total number of people of voting age in those counties. And so when you go to these 248 counties in this country and see that we have more people of voting age in the counties, that's a real potential for mischief and a real need to clean up the voter rolls. And one of the things for those of us in the state of Texas to be encouraged about is that Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General, has been identifying a number of issues where there is a need to clean up the voter rolls and also a need to address the issue of non-citizens who are registered to vote in Texas. Now, more recently, we've even talked about this with Don Huffines, in which he was able to come up with some pretty alarming statistics just for Dallas alone, in which he found that if you look at the Dallas County in which they've canceled voter registrations, they've had to cancel voter registrations for 1,800 people. And they found that 356 of those actually had voted in Dallas County, some as far back as 1980. And these, I think I always like to point out, are individuals that, if you will, self-identify. In other words, they are called for jury duty. And one of the reasons that you can say you do not have to serve on jury duty is to say you're not a citizen. Well, when they check that box and hand it in, they go, wait a minute. You're on the voter rolls. Well, yeah, I'm not a citizen, but I vote. Well, you're not supposed to vote because you're a non-citizen. And so we have some examples, even in Dallas County, where this has been taking place. And when you start looking at the number of individuals that probably have been voting who themselves are not actually registered citizens, one estimate in the book is about 5 million non-citizens voted illegally in 2008. That's a pretty good estimate, and the book actually does a good job of explaining that and answering some of those who have challenged that figure. So I think that's pretty helpful as well. But on the program, I also told the story of where we've had James O'Keefe and Project Veritas on, just to show how easy it is for you to get somebody else's ballot, in which you had a 20-something white kid went into the precinct where the Attorney General, that time Eric Holder, was registered and pretended to be Eric Holder. Now, this is a 20-something white kid who is pretending to be the Attorney General, Eric Holder, who is a 60-something African-American, and they were ready to hand him a ballot so that if Eric Holder came in later, he'd say, well, no, you've already voted. And so you can see how easy that is to do. Eric Eggers gave us another story, and that is in New York City's Department of Investigation. They actually sent people out to cast ballots in elections that weren't going to be really contested, where it would make any difference. Elderly citizens, felons, and people who voted, and all but 2 of them were successful. The one of the unsuccessful attempts only occurred because the officer attempted to vote using the name of a felon listed on the rolls, only to be informed by the polls inspector that he was requesting the ballot of the poll worker's son. So they caught him only because they knew the son. And, of course, as I've mentioned, we have, again, 5 million non-citizens who voted in 2008. We can update that even to 2016, and I suspect there's some people doing that work right now. And what will happen, of course, in 2018 is anybody's guess. And one of the other things that I thought was really powerful in the book is they were providing pages and pages of documentation in an appendix on the number of double votes in Florida, because you can't get access to all of the voter rolls, but they were able to get access to them in Florida and found that there were 2,100 people who were double registered in the state of Florida. And individuals saying, well, yeah, because when I'm at my home, I vote, and then when I'm in my vacation home, I vote again. And so you've got people actually double voting. So all of this illustrates, again, the concern that we have about voter irregularities. And in cases where individuals win by substantial margins, as much as we don't like them, they're not going to affect the outcome. But we've had too many close elections. As a matter of fact, some of these for the Texas House have been sometimes very, very close. This election for the U.S. Senate with Congressman O'Rourke and Senator Cruz could be one of those. And so that's why these voter irregularities are something we pay attention to. And if you'd like to read a little bit more, my commentary's on our website, pointofview.net. You can, of course, download it. You can put it on your Facebook page. But most importantly, I hope you'll just sign up to receive it in your inbox every single day. So voter fraud on the website today. And we've talked quite a bit about Brett Kavanaugh. And a little bit later, we'll come back to that when we talk with Manuel Miranda. But after the break, we're going to spend some time in studio talking with our good friend, Pastor Robert Jeffress. All that coming up right after this.
Go mobile with Point of View and take transformation with you on the go. Search in Google Play or the Apple Store for Point of View Radio, the Point of View Radio mobile app. Download it free today.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. This hour, we are just privileged to have in studio with us Pastor Robert Jeffress. We're going to be talking about his new book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, a fascinating book in which we learn God's 7 secrets for success and significance. We're going to learn a lot about the life of Elijah, and it is published by Baker. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but let me also encourage you to go to the website that we have a link here to, Pathway to Victory. My wife and I have supported that ministry for many years, continue to do so. Matter of fact, I got a few of the books from Robert Jeffress here, the whole collection, and it's because we just think so highly of your teaching. Of course, he is the senior pastor of the 13,000-member First Baptist Church, which has an enormous legacy, and we've talked about how God has blessed that church for so many years. Of course, the program Pathway to Victory is heard on more than 900 stations nationwide, also a weekly television program seen on cable systems and stations in the U.S. and nearly 200 countries around the world. And if that's not enough, also on the executive committee of the White House Faith Initiative. I think you'll be on with Fox News tonight. So again, just every time I turn on the TV, there's Pastor Robert Jeffress speaking to some of those issues.
There's a lot going on.
There certainly is.
Thanks for having me.
And a little bit later, I want to get into maybe a couple issues in the news, but let's do our work here as well, and that is choosing the extraordinary life. You start out with a pastor and teacher, if you will. I guess we should just simply see teacher Jim Dobson talking about the straight life. And I remember doing a commentary years ago about the straight life. You get up, you go to work, you do all that. It's kind of the ordinary life. But what we want to learn here is how to live an extraordinary life, and we can learn that from the story of Elisha, can't we?
Well, we can. Kirby, when I think about how most people live their lives, the straight life, I think about that Chicago sewer worker who was asked why he did what he did. He said, well, let me see. I dig the ditch to earn the money, to buy the bread, to get the strength to dig the ditch.
Yes.
And, that's how most Christians are living their lives as well. It's a mundane routine. Get up, go to work, come home, eat dinner, watch TV, go to bed, and it's over and over again. I think God has more in mind for us. And that's why I wrote Choosing the Extraordinary Life, and I've subtitled it God's 7 Secrets for Significance and Success. Now, this isn't a positive thinking mumbo-jumbo book.
Yeah.
This is built on the life of Elijah, because the Bible says Elijah was a person like we are. He had doubts, discouragements. He wasn't a spiritual Superman, but God used him in an extraordinary way in his generation because of these 7 principles his life illustrates.
And what I think is interesting, when we look at the book of James, it does say that he was a man like us. Mm-hmm. And we've had Michael Yosef, you know him, on here, and he was talking about how really, in some respects, we don't know a lot about Elisha. He was an ordinary person. We see him on Mount Carmel, and all of us that have ever traveled to Israel, we know what it's like to stand there and to preach on it, talk about it, and we see him in his dynamism. But there is a backstory, which we're going to spend some time talking about. So I want to encourage you to kind of pay attention. Maybe you might even want to take some notes and number maybe from 1 to 7, because we're going to be really trying to talk about some of those secrets that are really part of your life. And one of those very significant ones was to really understand your unique purpose. Once you understand who you are, then people can't push you off of what might be your agenda or what God has called you to do.
That's right. And I think that first chapter about significant people understand and discover their unique purpose, that is so foundational to the extraordinary life. You know, we all know as Christians, we have a general purpose to glorify God.
Right.
But God is also giving us a unique purpose to fulfill that purpose. I say it this way: God has a unique story He's writing in our lives to tell His story. And I actually, Kerby, used that word story as an acrostic for
yes.
the 5 principles for finding your unique purpose in life, STORY. The S stands for start with Scripture. Now, admittedly, you're not going to find your vocation by reading the Bible unless you're into shepherding or tax collecting. But other than that, you're not going to find the specific purpose, but you're going to find principles about what God's trying to do in your life. So it starts with Scripture. The T, talk to others. You know, Proverbs 13:10-20 says, in the multitude of counselors, there's victory. Many times God will use other people to reveal His purpose to us. I remember when I was in the 9th grade, right down the road here at West Junior High School in Richardson, I had a 9th grade speech teacher named Miss Fry. And I'm telling you, she was a tough old gal. She would march up and down the aisles telling us to speak louder when we spoke. And she said to me one day, she said, "Jeffress, I want to talk to you after class."
Uh-oh.
And so I sat down with her trembling. She said, "Jeffress, you're going to be a preacher one day." And that scares the bejeebers out of me because you could sell anybody anything. She's the first person, Kerby, who ever envisioned for me that I was going to be a pastor. In fact, many years later, after I was in the ministry, I received word that she had died and she had left in her will that she wanted me to conduct her memorial service.
Isn't that
I
something?
mean, as a junior high student, she knew what God's plan was. So talk to other people, listen to them. The O stands for in story, obey your passion.
Yeah.
You know, God many times directs us by the passions He puts in our hearts. I mean, He's given you a passion for broadcasting and for politics. For other people, He's given a passion for medicine, for other working with children. Our passions are not antithetical to God's purpose. Many times they are directing us toward God's purpose. The Bible says, delight yourself in the Lord and He will give you the desires of your heart. So obey your passions. Recognize your gifts and abilities. If God calls you to a unique purpose, He'll give you the gifts, Philippians 2:13. And, I would encourage our listeners, ask yourself, what do I do that seems to come naturally? What is it that when I do this thing, other people say you were born to do that? Mm-hmm. Many times your unique gifts are a key to God's unique story and plan for your life. And then Y stands for yield to God's leadership. There comes that time, and it did come in Elijah's time, when you have to decide, am I going to obey and follow God's plan for my life?
Again, I love that acrostic because, again, start with Scripture is the S, talk to others, and that's a part of my life as well. Somebody one time said, you'd be good on radio. You got a radio voice. I said, well, I don't know anything about that. Obey your passions, and that is certainly the case. Recognize your gifts and abilities and yield to the leading of the Spirit. And in some respects, we have to recognize that each one of us does have a unique purpose, just like all of us have unique fingerprints. All of us have a unique set of gifts, and there's nobody just like you that will ever be on the planet again. And so that's really important for us to begin to really figure out what God wants to use us for.
And it is, and in the church, we've got this perverted idea about passions and interests. We think God's will must be the most distasteful, unpleasant thing we could ever think about. In other words, it must be God's will for me to go to Africa as a missionary and live in a hut because that's the worst thing I could think of. Well, you know what, Kerby? This sounds like heresy to some people, but you know why people go to Africa and minister in third world countries? It's because they want to go to Africa and minister. That's where they are happiest. They would be miserable doing anything else. And there's nothing wrong with that. We ought to do the things that God puts in our heart to do.
And Scripture talks about God gives you the desires of your heart, and we should delight in the Lord. And so that's just the first one. Discover your unique purpose. We have 6 more to go, but we need to take a break. And let me just mention this book is published by Baker. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but if you would like to know more about Robert Jeffress' Pathway to Victory, we have a link on our website, pointofview.net. 200 pages endorsed by just kind of a who's who of all sorts of people we've had on this program, like Greg Laurie and James Robison and Larry Crabb and others. So we're going to take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Pastor Robert Jeffress right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Early voting for the midterm elections begins in a few weeks. That's why I had Eric Eggers on the Point of View radio talk show to discuss his book on voter fraud. He has put together lots of facts and statistics that election officials need to consider. The potential for mischief is very great. Approximately 248 counties in this country have more names on their voter rolls than the total number of people of voting age in those counties. That is reason enough to clean up voter rolls, especially since the Supreme Court ruled that cleanup procedures, like the ones used in Ohio, are indeed constitutional. On the program, I told the story of James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. They used hidden cameras to demonstrate Election Day ballot problems, and perhaps the most notable was a 20-something white kid who was offered the ballot that should have been given to then Attorney General Eric Holder, who is a 60-something African American. Eric Eggers gave another story of the New York City's Department of Investigation that sent people to cast ballots on behalf of elderly citizens, felons, and people who had moved. All but two of them succeeded with no challenge or question. One of the few unsuccessful attempts occurred when an officer attempted to vote using the name of a felon listed on the rolls, only to be informed by the poll inspector that he was requesting the ballot of the poll worker's son. One study estimates that more than 5 million non-citizens voted illegally in 2008, and the book provides perspective on those who doubt those figures. The book also provides pages of documentation for the number of double votes in Florida broken down by county. The number exceeds 2,100. Any or all of these so-called voter irregularities could make the difference in some congressional and statewide races. That's why we need to pay attention to the potential problem of voter fraud. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Robert Jeffress. A little bit later, we'll open up the phones if you have some comments, but I want to spend some time really focusing on this outstanding book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, God's 7 Secrets for Success and Significance. It's published by Baker. Probably can find it in your local bookstore, but we also given you an opportunity to find out more about Pathway to Victory. We talked about Discover Your Unique Purpose. I love the second one. This fits very well into your wheelhouse. Determine to influence your culture. Even off air, you and I sometimes talk about how some Christians just shy away. Nobody's ever accused you of shying away from controversial issues, and sometimes in a culture that has lost its way, where the values are inverted, even speaking truth and talking about purity and honesty, integrity become controversial. Isn't that amazing?
It is. And, you know, in my book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, I use Elijah as the example. And one of the secrets of Elijah's life was he made the determination he was going to have an impact on his culture. His calling was not just to speak to Israel or the committed Jews, but to speak to non-Jews, even to speak to evil King Ahab and government and say, without stuttering or stammering, "Thus saith the Lord." And, you know, Kerby, I think we have developed a theology in the church today to really cover our cowardice. And it's this idea that, oh, we shouldn't try to impose our values on a secular world, and that we have a right to speak to one another, but we don't have a right to speak to government or the entertainment industry. And it's really out of cowardice that we've developed that. And my Bible says that God's not just sovereign over the church, he's sovereign over government, he's sovereign over all creation. And we have a duty, a calling from Christ to be salt and light, to penetrate this culture and to change this culture through the truth of God's word. And I see that in Elijah's life, and it's something we model. And of course, a lot of our listeners may be at home right now. Maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, and you're wondering, well, how do I influence my culture? Well, your culture may not be Washington, D.C. or Hollywood, California. It starts with the home you're in. It may be the school that we're in. It may be our business, but we've all been called to impact the culture. You know, Jesus talked about us being salt, you know, that needs to penetrate meat in order to delay the decay. Or for salt to have any effectiveness, it can't remain in the salt shaker. It has to get out of the shaker and actually penetrate the meat to do any good. We've got to start penetrating the culture.
You know, one of the other things that I thought was significant is Elijah's going against Ahab. And you know, Dr. Jeffress, that sometimes there's this idea that, well, I'd stand for truth, but it's just so hostile. Well, if you look at the various kings, I would have to put Ahab at the very bottom.
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
the worst of all and the most hostile of all. You put Ahab and Jezebel and what actually happened to prophets at that time. So if Elijah was bold enough to speak against something that evil, I think the implication is we should at least be bold enough to speak out in a culture where we have the freedom to still speak out on those issues.
Absolutely. I tell the story in the book a few years ago. I got invited to come out to be on Bill Maher's show, Real Time with Bill Maher. And I'd seen him on a few interviews, but I'd never watched the program. And I said, well, you know, if I have a chance to share the gospel, why not? And I remember our leaders in the church. And so they thought I'd lost my mind. They said, have you seen that program, Pastor? He's going to eat you alive. And so I taped some of the programs. I watched it and I said, you know, they're right. But anyway, I began thinking, well, you know, if the Apostle Paul would go to Mars Hill to try to influence the gospel,
right,
maybe I can go to Mars Studio in Hollywood and do it. And it was interesting. We had 350 people praying for me. And that interview went unlike any I expected. And his producers said later, we've never seen Bill treat a Christian with such respect. And at the end of the interview, he invited me to come to his after party afterwards with him. And so we went to the after party. We spent 30 minutes in the corner talking. And he said, you know, Pastor, I don't agree with one thing you believe, but you're a great spokesman for what you believe. And I have today, years later, unbelievers who've never gone to church, but they remember that broadcast and they talk to me about it. And I'm just saying, whether it's in Hollywood or whether it's your business, the only way our light of the gospel is going to dispel the darkness is if we first of all confront the darkness. And that's what we've been called to do as Christians.
And Bill Maher's one of my prayer targets. You know, matter of fact, sometimes in my Sunday school class, I'll say something that Bill Maher has said, you know, you don't believe in a talking snake or whatever, you know, the line he's used lately. And I would just say, well, okay, how would you respond to that? You know, not that I'll ever be on the program with him, although I would certainly welcome that opportunity as well. And just again, appreciate your willingness to get out there and, if nothing else, provide a role model for individuals. But we've talked about discovering your unique purpose, determined to influence your culture, but also wait on God's timing. We see that in Elijah as well. You know, most of us see him on Mount Carmel, and here he's already confronting Ahab. But there's a time before that where he's in the brook Cherith and where he's really being, in a sense, nurtured and discipled by God before he stands and makes that very important confrontation.
Well, yeah, you find him bursting on the scene in 1 Kings 17, makes that great pronouncement, and then God basically says, okay, that's enough, and he sends him into seclusion for over 3 years,
Yes.
you know, 6 months by the brook Cherith, and then with the widow at Zarephath. And I'm imagining that during that time, I think Elijah probably thought, well, his best days were behind him.
Yes.
He had made his big splash. God had forgotten about him. But God knew exactly where he was. He had some invaluable lessons he was teaching Elijah before the next big thing. And I say in the book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, waiting time doesn't have to be wasted time if you're listening to God's voice in your life. And, you know, I recall my own experience. You know, I had served as youth pastor in the church I now pastor, First Baptist Dallas. You know what Dallas is like. Then God picked me up. He sent me 100 miles west to a county seat town of 5,200 people to pastor my first church. And I'm telling you, it was pretty quiet and pretty dull out there. And on Friday afternoons, my daughter and I used to sit on the curb and watch the cars go down the highway. One about every 30 minutes would pass by, you know. And, you know, there were times I thought, I got to get out of here, you know. But God had had some lessons he was teaching me during those 7 years that were invaluable to the plan he had for me later on.
And again, you think of these athletes now that will train and train and train and train so they can eventually, maybe if they want to get into the NFL, run a 440 in 4.4 seconds, and it's all these kinds of things that they want to do, and they've trained for years in obscurity before they actually have success. I think there's a lesson to be taught for some of our seminary graduates. There is a timing, and for other individuals, there will be that opportunity as well. So I wish we could focus on that, but I want to get a few more. And secret number 4 is burn the ships. Now, when I first saw that, I said, he's talking about Cortez. But let's talk about that for just a minute, because, of course, in order to make it really clear to his soldiers that there's no going back, it was to burn the ships. And there is a sense in which Elisha uses that same kind of illustration. You've been vacillating, but the time has come for you to choose upsides.
That's right. I mean, burn the ships means decide whether or not you're all in. Yeah. And I think Elijah showed that with the Israelites. He said, okay, it's time for you to quit hesitating between two opinions. If Baal is really God, then serve him with all of your heart. If Jehovah is God, serve him with all of your heart. And I think we need to hear that today and make that mind our own minds up about what really is going to be our God. Christians can be some of the most miserable people in the world because they have one foot in this world and one foot in the next world. They try to worship money, but they try to worship God at the same time. You can't serve two masters. If money's really is your God, give it everything you've got, not just half of your heart. If pleasure is really what you think life is about, don't go half-hearted into it. Give up all of your scruples. Go for it full time. But if God is really who he says he is, serve him with all of your heart. If we're going to have an extraordinary life, we've got to decide that we're all in.
And I was just thinking, too, how the fourth principle relates to the first one, and that is once you have your story down, once you understand who you are, what your purpose is, then you don't have to make those decisions. I've had businessmen say sometimes when people would come and give me a deal, I would look at that, and sometimes within 5 seconds, I've already decided whether I'm going to say yes or no, because there was something that stuck out as being immoral, unethical, not appropriate. And so once you understand who you are, you can make very clear decisions about what you're going to be doing in the future.
Yeah, a life purpose is like a beacon that gives you direction in times of darkness. It helps you in times of uncertainty clarify what direction you should go.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to spend just a minute talking about what is available on the website Pathway to Victory. We always like to do that at the bottom of the hour, and then we'll work our way through a few more of these principles because they're very significant. We've talked about understanding your unique purpose. We've talked about how to influence the culture, waiting on God's timing, and burn the ships. We'll come back and unleash the power of prayer. That was a really good one. I really appreciated that. Learn how to handle bad days and live life with the end in view. While I mentioned it, there are some other really good books talking about the end and heaven and a variety of others. So we'll talk about some of the great resources available through Dr. Robert Jeffress at Pathway to Victory. It is at our website, pointofview.net, and there is an opportunity for you, first of all, to get a copy of the book if you'd like to. We've also, of course, have a link to the website, which is very easy to remember. It's PTV for pathwaytovictory.org. As a matter of fact, the information that pops right up is the book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life. We'll take a break and continue our conversation right after these important messages.
Go mobile with Point of View and take transformation with you on the go. Search in Google Play or the Apple Store for Point of View Radio, the Point of View Radio mobile app. Download it free today.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation for a little bit longer with Pastor Robert Jeffress. Let me just mention that on our website we have a link to Pathway to Victory, or you can just type in ptv.org. And there is a place for people to sign up. I have said on many occasions that my wife and I support your ministry, believe in it.
Thank you.
Certainly appreciate what you do on radio, what you do on television. Of course, we appreciate the work that you do through the White House Faith Initiative. Appreciate the fact you'll probably be on Fox News tonight with Shannon Bream or somebody. Of course, that always changes, but be watching for some of that. But if you would like to connect up with PTV, there's a place where you can sign up for name, address, email, those kinds of things. A lot of great material, including this book. So talk about what's available when people land on your website.
Yeah, well, right now, of course, we're making available our book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life. It just came out last week, God's 7 Secrets for Success and Significance. And also, just for going to the website, ptv.org, we'll also send you, without any cost or obligation, a new resource called the Elijah Map. And it's a map of the significant milestones in Elijah's ministry. You can tuck it into the front of the book here and use it as you go through the book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life.
Well, and again, you've got a map of Israel. Of course, you've got prayer journals, all sorts of books and resources, DVDs.
And you can also, by the way, we're doing the series, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, on radio and television. If you've missed any of the messages, you can download them free of charge.
Let me encourage you to do that, because we have a chance to hear you live on radio, but I know some of our listeners may or may not, or they travel. And so just take the time to go to ptv.org. And we're going to make our way through a few more of these, and then I'd love to get some comments before the end of the program from Dr. Jeffress about what's going on in our society. But we've talked about 4. Let's take number 5, unleash the power of prayer. And that's important, too, because we sometimes make prayer an afterthought, but it really should be the very beginning of how we think about how we're going to have an impact on our society.
Well, again, that's how an ordinary person has an extraordinary life, is through unleashing the power of prayer. And Elijah illustrates that. You know, James said in James 5, the effective prayer of a righteous person accomplishes much. And then in the next verse, Kerby, he uses Elijah as an example of that righteous person who accomplished much through prayer. And when you think about it, prayer was never an afterthought. It was the key to everything that happened in Elijah's prayer. He prayed that it would not rain, and it didn't rain for 3 years. He prayed for rain, and it rained. He prayed for the fire of God to come down, and in a 64-word prayer, God's fire did come down from heaven. And I think he's a great illustration of that. And I talk about the fact that Elijah illustrates about prayer, that we ought to pray honestly. You know, don't pray for what you think ought to be in your heart. Pray for what is actually in your heart. God knows it anyway. You're not going to fool him, so be honest. And then pray boldly. I mean, Elijah asked God for big things. And when I was writing this book, my daughter and son-in-law, they had gone through 3 miscarriages, and they decided to pray big. They prayed that God would give them triplets. Now, we don't have any history of triplets in our family, but they wanted to pray for triplets, one life to replace each life that was lost. And God answered that prayer back in December and gave them triplets. And I just say in the book, if you want to see God do big things, then pray big things.
I might just mention, too, that you dedicate it to your triplets. And when I first heard about that, I smiled, because we had just had Jeremiah Johnston on. He's just had triplets. And one of my staff members at Probe has triplets, but very few. So when I found out that you had triplet grandchildren, I was just pleased and thrilled for them, because I did know some of the struggles that they've been through. You've got a great daughter and a wonderful son-in-law, and I've had a chance sometimes to interact with them over the years. So thank you for them as well. A couple more. How to learn how to handle bad days. I love your contrast here. You got the 2 portraits of Elijah. In 1 Kings 18, the hand of the Lord was on Elijah. 1 Kings 19, he was afraid and ran for his life. 1 Kings 18, Elijah was full of faith. 1 Kings 19, Elijah was full of fear. And it goes through it. It's a perfect comparison, because sometimes we think that when we stand for the Lord, everybody's going to stand back and applaud. But sometimes some of the most difficult experiences I've had, whether it's been on college campuses or sometimes in the media like you, or been when I face some of these really hostile circumstances.
Well, that's right. And extraordinary people learn how to handle bad days. Notice I didn't say they learn how to avoid bad days. In this life, you're going to have bad days or bad seasons of life when disappointments pile up. Some of those bad seasons of life, Kerby, are the result of our own bad choices, but sometimes they're just the result of living in a sin-infected world. And I talk about how Elijah refused to be paralyzed by bad days, but he did learn how to handle them. And there was a physical element to handling bad days. You know, after the Jezebel incident and being on Mount Carmel and having that great victory, he was physically exhausted. And I quote my old mentor, Howard Hendricks, who says, sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is take a nap. Yeah. Elijah slept, you know. But there's an emotional and spiritual impact, a way to handle bad days as well that we talk about. So, you know, that's a very practical chapter in my book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life.
And I like that practical aspect because sometimes you can be involved in such constant, high-intensity kinds of activities. You know, when you read in the scriptures, and Jesus walked, you know, once you go to Israel, you realize it probably took a day to walk from there. So there was a time to decompress. There was a time to talk with the disciples. There was a time to sit down and eat some bread and some fish. We can just go from one high-intensity activity to the next. I mean, you can be a pastor in a meeting with your elders or deacons and struggling with that, and then you're on television, you're debating something, and then something else, and there's never any rest time. And I think after this high-intensity activity that Elijah finds himself confronting the prophets of Baal and Ahab and Jezebel and all of that, there's just a time to decompress. So sometimes I think if it was true in that century, it's certainly true in the 21st century.
That's right. There needs to be a time you put the cell phone down. I'm going to put mine down right now and, you know, disengage for a little while.
Yeah. I've one other one I thought I'd just mention real quickly. When we were talking about the power of prayer, I just laughed out loud when I was reading this one about a local Baptist church opposed a construction of a bar in a little town. They began an all-night prayer vigil. That night, the lightning struck and burned the bar down to the ground. So then the owner brought a suit against the church. I just love this. And the church hired an attorney as well. So the owner of the bar actually was claiming that the church was liable for the bar's destruction. The church hired an attorney claiming that they were not responsible. But I love the judge. No matter how this case comes out, one thing is clear. The bar owner believes in the power of prayer, and the church does not. When I read that, I laughed out loud. It was so hilarious. I just love that.
And so true.
Yeah. But if nothing else, there's just a lot of Robert Jeffress humor in here. But just before we take our next break, let's mention the last secret, and that is live life with the end in view, because I certainly recognize that not only do you need to know who you are in terms of your purpose, you need to sort of know where you're going in terms of how the rest of the story plays out.
Well, that's right. Elijah had a real sense of his own mortality. He knew his time on earth was limited before he got caught up in the whirlwind, and he poured his life into his mentoree, Elisha, and passed his faith on successfully. And when he got caught up in that whirlwind, headed to heaven, I often think about it, as he looked down and saw Elisha down there, what did he think? And I think as he went up into heaven, he was grateful that he had a short list of regrets and a long list of people he had impacted for God. And that's a great way to live your life with the end in view.
Well, and I love also passing the baton, if you will, from Elijah to Elisha.
Yeah.
We should be looking for individuals. For our younger audience, maybe you should be looking for a mentor to mentor you. But for most of us, we should be thinking about who we might be discipling or mentoring in the future. And the Christian faith is not one that's on autopilot. If we don't pass the baton on to the next generation, we lose that next generation, don't we?
We do. And the most important people we pass that faith on to are the children and grandchildren we leave behind.
Yes, those triplets that are there
That's
and
right.
part of your family. Just before we take a break, we've got about a minute, but talk real quickly about this, because if people wanted to study this individually, they can do so. But you also have an Elisha map and some other things. If some of our listeners would want to teach us in a small group, you've got some material there as well,
We
don't
do.
you?
Choosing the Extraordinary Life, Choosing the Extraordinary Life. It's available at ptv.org. You can also get the DVDs that go along with it and a study guide and get the whole package if you'd like. It's a great study because because I'm telling you, everybody may not want to know about the end times, but everybody wants an extraordinary life.
But let me mention that there are some excellent books on the end times about heaven, which, again, I just have mentioned. Again, your book on heaven, which I've really appreciated, The Divine Defense, as well as How Can I Know These Various Issues. Some of the contemporary issues you address are all just part of that. So please take the time, if you haven't already, to go to ptv.org. That's an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about the pathway to victory, and we have all of that on our website, pointofview.net, including a place where you can click on that to get the book either in hardcover or Kindle, and it's just out, and I'm just thrilled that we can have Pastor Jeffress in studio. When we come back from the break, I'd like to ask him a question or two. Maybe he has some thoughts about certainly Judge Brett Kavanaugh. He also, of course, has served in the White House Faith Initiative, and I'd certainly love to get some thoughts about how we can pray for the president and the vice president and some of the struggles and challenges they face as well. So we'll come back and chat with him briefly about that. And we have a lot more to cover in the next hour as well. We'll be back right after these messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Not long ago, we examined Article 6 of the Constitution, which prohibits the application of a religious test for office. The point of this provision is to both prevent the exclusion of religious individuals from office and to ensure good and wise citizens of every stripe can serve the country. Recent Senate confirmation hearings brought Article 6 to the national stage, raising questions of religious liberty. Senator Bernie Sanders questioned nominee Russell Vought over an article in which he examined a passage from the Gospel of John defending the exclusivity of Christ in salvation according to Vaught's Christian faith. Sanders decried Vaught's conclusion that followers of other faiths, and Islam in particular, were condemned according to Vaught's explanation of the Christian faith. I won't debate the theological correctness of Vaught's arguments, but it's worth noting that at the conclusion of questioning, Senator Sanders announced he would vote against Vaught, not over any professional qualification, but because, quote, this nominee is really not someone who is what this country is supposed to be about, unquote. Senators can vote for or against executive nominees for nearly any reason, but for one to publicly question a nominee's religious faith, pronounce it disagreeable, and withhold his vote expressly because of the nominee's faith makes me wonder if, in fact, the senator from Vermont may have created a religious test for office in violation of the Constitution. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and again, in studio with us today, Dr. Robert Jeffress, talking about, as we have, his book, Choosing the Extraordinary Life. And if you'd like to know more about that, we have a link to Pathway to Victory. But First of all, Pastor, I would love to get your thoughts. I know you've interacted with the White House. You're on the White House Faith Initiative. And right now, this has been just a circus, with apologies to people that work in a circus. The confirmation hearings, have we seen anything like this before? I have some young people watching on the other side of the glass. I just want to say this is never how the confirmation hearings have gone, other than once you had the borking of Judge Robert Bork. But in most cases, the assumption was that the president gets his or her, if you ever have a female president, opportunity to place people on the federal court and the Supreme Court. Unless there's some reason not to, the advice and consent is fairly limited. But this time, it's been worse than we've ever seen, and the antics inside the courtroom and inside the hearing room and outside the hearing room have been dramatic. And these allegations now over the last couple of days. What's your thoughts?
And it is reminiscent of Anita Hill in the 11th hour springing of that charge against Clarence Thomas. And look, I did talk to the White House yesterday, and they are standing behind Brett Kavanaugh and continue to today. They do have a difficult tightrope they're walking. I mean, they cannot just summarily dismiss these troubling allegations and risk disenfranchising their GOP and independent female voters. But on the other hand, they know that their base, especially evangelicals, are behind them because of a conservative justice nominee like Brett Kavanaugh. So I think the president has played this perfectly, let the process play out. And look, I'd be the first to say, I don't know whether these allegations are true, but what I know with absolute certainty is the Democrats don't care if they're true. All they're trying to do is derail this nomination. If they were really interested in justice, if they really wanted the truth, they would not have sat on this information for 2 months. Dianne Feinstein could have called together a closed-door group and outlined, without revealing the name of the person, the general accusations. There could have been an FBI investigation, but they waited until the 11th hour to do this, to derail the nomination. So I'm glad the White House is pushing through cautiously, but I still have a good feeling about the outcome.
And I think it illustrates the bigger issue. You know, when the Supreme Court was not making major decisions about whether it was affirmative action, busing, abortion, pornography, same-sex marriage, whatever it might be, these weren't as maybe highly charged kind of cases. Now, every once in a while you had a Hainsworth or a Carswell that was turned down, but in most cases, even going all the way back to Antonin Scalia, more than 90 senators actually confirmed him. More than 90 senators confirmed Ruth Bader Ginsburg. More than 90 senators confirmed of Justice Breyer and others. But it's become more controversial, and as in some cases, like you said, the Democrats don't have control of the House or the Senate or the White House. The last vestige where they can maybe push through some of the things they want to push through is the United States Senate. So it's raised the stakes, hasn't it?
Oh, it has. And look, you know, you've had in the last week, you've had the Woodward book, you've had the New York Times op-ed that paint the picture of the president being some of this out-of-control 5th or 6th grader. And I said Friday night on Lou Dobbs' show, you don't become a billionaire and president by being an idiot. I mean, this president is very, very smart. And one of the things he knows, and I've heard him say, he knows the reason evangelicals supported him was because of his promise of a conservative judiciary. So he's going to do everything he can to fulfill that promise.
You know, one of the things that people always ask me is, what do you think Donald Trump is like? And I said, well, I don't know. I depend on people like Robert Jeffress who have met him. I've never met him, never will meet him. You've met him. And some people say you get two kind of images. You get the image of what you see in the tweets or the way in which it's portrayed by, you know, some of the recent books like Fear. And then you have the other person you meet face to face. Tell us a little bit more about him, because most of us never will have a chance to meet him face to face.
I was with him again just a couple of weeks ago privately. And, you know, every time I'm with him, I walk away with, how in the world can a guy like this, with all the stuff getting thrown at him, be so calm and steady? I mean, I told Lou Dobbs this Friday night, I just happened to be with him on 3 very stress-filled days. I was with him in Trump Tower on Election Day. I was with him seated right next to him during his first interview right after Hollywood Access tapes were revealed. I was in his office, the Oval Office, the day after the FBI raid on Michael Cohen's offices. And in every time, Kerby, in each of those instances, he was was cool, calm, deliberative, and I walked away thinking this is the kind of guy you want running the country. And to answer your question, yes, there is a difference between President Trump in private and the campaign President Trump. Again, he's highly intelligent, highly inquisitive, and I think we're very, very lucky to have him as the commander-in-chief.
Tell us how we can be praying not only for him, who many of us don't know, but also Mike Pence, who we do know. We've interviewed him many times, and he's interviewed us, because he used to have a talk show. So we've known him for a long time and just think the world of him.
Yes.
But how can we pray for the president and vice president? They are under an incredible amount of stress and pressure right now, aren't they?
They exactly are. And, I think about that tweet President Trump sent out a year and a half ago. He was standing in front of the Western Wall, and he was praying, and he had the caption underneath it, praying for God's wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what he prays for, and we ought to pray for him. I've heard him say many times, the 5 words that have come to mean the most to me is when I hear people say, I am praying for you. And I know the First Lady believes that as well. So let's pray for their physical and spiritual protection. He said the other night to a group, he said, Pastor Jeffress says I'm not a perfect person, but I'm a pretty good leader. He's the first to acknowledge he's not a perfect person, but he's doing, I believe, the best job he knows to do for our country. And whether we're Republican or Democrat, we all win if he wins. And we need to really pray for wisdom for him.
Let's talk about how we can also pray for the White House Faith Initiative, because you're one of a number of individuals, and with maybe a few exceptions theologically, we have such agreement with so many of those individuals there. And I just think it's amazing that you have that level of access. But again, how can we be praying for you that find yourself giving spiritual counsel to the President of the United States?
Well, I think always all those involved in this want to be sure they're sharing God's point of view on things. And look, I tell people about President Trump, when it comes to evangelicals, he may not be exactly like us, but at least he likes us. And he doesn't hate us like the last president. So we're grateful to have somebody like President Trump.
I might just mention that you will probably be on tonight. Of course, you never know for sure. But Shannon Bream, she's doing a good job, isn't she?
She's doing a great job.
I've been very impressed with her.
She was the Supreme Court reporter for Fox before she came on with her own show, and so she's going to have some interesting insights. I think I'm going to be a part of that at 10 p.m. Central on the Fox News channel.
So let me, again, just encourage people to watch for you. And again, one more time, let's talk about what's available. Pathway to Victory, ptv.org. You mentioned it before, but let's just, again, talk about the fact that you can study this book individually, but I would encourage people that are pastors, Bible study leaders, Bible fellowship leaders, small group leaders. This is something where using the DVD, you could really use this as an ongoing study, couldn't you?
You could. And again, the title of the book is Choosing the Extraordinary Life, and it's available in hardback. You can get it at ptv.org or any bookstore or online retailer, but from PTV, you can also get the DVDs.
Yeah, so again, 200 pages published by Baker Books, and we love our friends at Baker Publishing. And again, a great resource, Choosing the Extraordinary Life, God's 7 Secrets for Success and Significance. We come back, Manuel Miranda is going to be with us. You may remember his name got mentioned a few times during the Kavanaugh nomination, so we're going to be talking to him about that. And then, of course, opening up the lines for your conversation and comments about what has been happening over these last few days in the confirmation hearings, which will convene again on Monday. Oh, it's going to be another circus. We know that'll be the case. So again, take the time to visit our website, pointofview.net, and find the link to Pathway to Victory. We'll take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
From Universal 1440 comes Unbroken, Path to Redemption. Based on the best-selling book telling the rest of the true story of Olympian and World War II hero Louis Zamperini.
Tonight, there's a drowning man just looking for some type of hope for the future. But there's a lifeline. Just reach out.
Unbroken, Path to Redemption. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at unbrokenfilm.com.
You don't become an Olympian without investing all you've got. You don't become a war hero without putting it all on the line. Those who leave a mark on this world demonstrate they believe in something greater than themselves, a purpose, a cause. In a time of fake news, the need for solid information is perhaps greater than ever. Bring truth to the nation by joining the Truth Team at Point of View. Our cause needs heroes like you. Demonstrate what you believe. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time, as we have been in the past, talking about some of the histrionics of the Kavanaugh hearings, as well as what some people have called the Kavanaugh ambush. But there was another issue that hasn't really been given as much attention lately because it's been overshadowed by a lot of those activities. But it's illustrated by one of the articles we've posted on the website. And it says in the Washington Post, Manuel Miranda was in bed Wednesday morning suffering from a kidney stone when he heard his name invoked as a key player during the televised hearing of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. As Miranda listened, Senator Patrick Leahy suggested he played a key role in an event that raised new questions about the credibility of Brett Kavanaugh. So I thought you might want to hear from Manuel Miranda, who is now, of course, working as a law firm manager, international finance and project development attorney, individual that was, of course, mentioned at the hearings. And Manuel, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak out.
You know, what I thought was so interesting is, like you said, you were suffering and probably a great deal of pain. I can't even imagine what you were dealing with at that moment. Then you turn on the television set and your name shows up. And a lot of it had to do with the fact, as we might have to educate our listeners for a few minutes, about an episode going back, I believe it was in 2002, when it turns out that the Democrats had stored some information on a computer that you had access to. Now, some of them call it hacking, but, you know, if somebody put something on my computer that I owned, I wouldn't necessarily say it's hacking if I read something on my own computer. But nevertheless, give us the story, because it led to all sorts of accusations against Brett Kavanaugh, and even mentioned you in passing. So tell us the story, if you might.
That's right. That's right. Well, the background is, as you say, in 2002, I was senior counsel to Senator Hatch, who was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee.
Right.
Later on, I would become counsel to Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist. That was later. But during that time, a young man found that he could tap on documents that were basically Democratic strategy memos and other documents that were saved on our shared server. He tapped on them and they opened. And he brought that to my attention. And what we saw was basically examples of the kind of strategy that the Democrats were deploying to stop the nominees of President Bush. I could go into that. It was things like meeting with outside groups and letting them vote and to determine who would get a hearing and who would not. That they were opposing a Hispanic judicial nominee because he was, quote, he is Latino, because he was Hispanic. And this sort of evidence, to me, evidence of corruption. And so we kept a lid on it and we kept monitoring that site. The bottom line is that we had permissions. That is to say, it was on our desktops. It was like leaving a document on my desktop, and we read it. And we read it because we thought that it was showing not only their strategy, but also the corrupt influences that were affecting the obstruction of Bush judges. So it all came to light eventually, and they accused us of hacking. They accused us of stealing, the commonly used verb that they use, that these documents were stolen. And, of course, they attacked our ethics. The irony of it all is that, they went after me very hard. They They submitted a complaint.
I remember
to the New York Bar.
Yeah.
Yep, and that was I wrote the response on my kitchen table, and it was summarily thrown out because government workers have a duty actually to find corruption, quote, wherever. The word is wherever, and so it was not unethical, and it was investigated by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. The matter was referred to them. They found that there were no laws broken, nothing was stolen, nothing was taken, and so. But nevertheless, unfortunately, Republican senators surrendered to the harangue, and led especially by Orrin Hatch. He just submitted to their claims that they were stolen and that they were being hacked and so on. Senators Cornyn, Senators Lindsey Graham also surrendered to the harangue, and so here we are 14 years later, and the matter is brought up in the nomination of Supreme Court nominee. Brett Kavanaugh and I worked closely. He was at the White House. I was in the Senate, and we worked closely together on particular nominees that were assigned to each of us. Judge Priscilla Owen of Texas was one, and so it was during that period of time that these memos came to light to me, and I used them mostly, frankly, to determine when our next hearing would be and who it would be, because they would give us 1 week notice. But they also evidenced corruption. And so here we are with Brett Kavanaugh, and they are basically, by using the words stealing and hacking as if it were true, they're creating this sort of a nefarious cloud around Brett Kavanaugh that he somehow participated by receiving information from me, just the mere receipt of information from me, that he somehow did something wrong. And I actually connect it directly to what is happening now, because what Democrats did in those 2 weeks, in the past 2 weeks, they slowly built up a case with some help from Republicans who didn't defend Kavanaugh. They slowly built up a case against his credibility. And I believe, knowing full well that they had a card in the hole, that they were going to bring it out. And so here we are. His credibility, they laid a foundation to attack his credibility, his honesty, and so on. And now his credibility is on the line in this sexual assault allegation.
And let me just, maybe I'll come to a break, because we are coming close to a break here. And so I'll just summarize it. We'll come back and talk about the significance of this, because, and maybe you can correct me even when we come back from the break if I miss something. But the argument, first of all, was it stolen property? It was not. But okay, if you start with that premise, then you have on both sides of the aisle something rather dramatic, because you have Patrick Leahy asking questions. He's a Democrat, of whether or not, if you indeed worked hand in hand with Miranda, were you aware that you had stolen property? Then you had on the Republican side Lindsey Graham saying, were you ever aware that you were dealing with stolen property? And Kavanaugh says no. Well, the premise of the question was wrong, because it assumed that it was stolen property in the first place. And then you just sort of head down that road of then already, once you accept the premise, make it worse. And so then Kavanaugh is trying to say, well, no, I just, we knew about that. And of course, we have posted one article that was from the Washington Post just to give you a sense of how it's pitched. Not that I agree with everything in the article, it just helps you understand that. So let's take a break. We'll come back and fill up just a little bit more of the information from Manuel Miranda, individual, of course, that worked in the Senate and had access to some of the information that was erroneously put on a server that he had access to. It was not stolen, it was not hacked, but of course that's the premise that was used to start the conversation. And then when Brett Kavanaugh didn't give an answer everybody liked, and they accused him of perjury, this would have been the big issue right now, if it weren't for the fact that now we have some other allegations that have come out, which, again, he said are completely false. So we'll get into that. And, of course, along the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Manuel Miranda right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Early voting for the midterm elections begins in a few weeks. That's why I had Eric Eggers on the Point of View radio talk show to discuss his book on voter fraud. He has put together lots of facts and statistics that election officials need to consider. The potential for mischief is very great. Approximately 248 counties in this country have more names on their voter rolls than the total number of people of voting age in those counties. That is reason enough to clean up voter rolls, especially since the Supreme Court ruled that cleanup procedures, like the ones used in Ohio, are indeed constitutional. On the program, I told the story of James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. They used hidden cameras to demonstrate Election Day ballot problems, and perhaps the most notable was a 20-something white kid who was offered the ballot that should have been given to then Attorney General Eric Holder, who is a 60-something African American. Eric Eggers gave another story of the New York City's Department of Investigation that sent people to cast ballots on behalf of elderly citizens, felons, and people who had moved. All but two of them succeeded with no challenge or question. One of the few unsuccessful attempts occurred when an officer attempted to vote using the name of a felon listed on the rolls, only to be informed by the poll inspector that he was requesting the ballot of the poll worker's son. One study estimates that more than 5 million non-citizens voted illegally in 2008, and the book provides perspective on those who doubt those figures. The book also provides pages of documentation for the number of double votes in Florida broken down by county. The number exceeds 2,100. Any or all of these so-called voter irregularities could make the difference in some congressional and statewide races. That's why we need to pay attention to the potential problem of voter fraud. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Universal 1440, Unbroken, Path to Redemption, the rest of World War II hero Louis Zamperini's true story, now playing, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Manuel Miranda with us for a few more minutes. By the way, if you'd like to join us, let's open up the phones. Open line 1-800-351-1212. What are your thoughts about the Kavanaugh ambush, as we've called it? And matter of fact, one of the articles we've posted today comes from the Wall Street Journal. I'll be reading it a little bit later, talking about how this tended to be an ambush because, after all, the individuals, and in this particular case, certainly Dianne Feinstein, who is the senator from California, knew about this for some time. And, of course, now we know the name Christine Blasey Ford, who has accused Brett Kavanaugh when she was 15, he was 17, of actually doing something that is inappropriate and escaping and is really sketchy on a lot of those details. So that's one of those issues I want to put on the table, and I would love to hear your comments. Do you think it is time for Judge Brett Kavanaugh to step down? Or on the other side, Wall Street Journal says we shouldn't even try to listen to Christina Ford. This happened 35 years ago. We can't confirm it. Those who were there, like, for example, his high school male friend Mark Judge, says he doesn't recall any kind of event. And so he thinks, and they, as the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, think we should move ahead. So love to get your comments, 1-800-351-1212. And Manuel Miranda, you have actually more than anybody else been able to kind of look behind the curtain and see the way some of the Democrats back in 2002, all the way to 2004 when you were there, to see the strategy behind the scenes. And you were sort of alluding to the fact that this strategy that we've seen played out by Senator Feinstein and Patrick Leahy, not to mention the histrionics of Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and others, This sort of fits with what you were able to discover back in 2002, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, no one should have any doubt that this was long coordinated to have exactly the timing that it has had, all to try to delay the nomination, to see if they could somehow stop it before the elections. And I would go further. You know, I live in the neighborhood where Brett Kavanaugh lives. My son went to the school where he was, the parish school where he was where Brett Kavanaugh was an altar boy. I know his life we're members actually of the same club and so on. And I know him well. I know exactly the kind of person he is a straight arrow beyond any doubt. So I understand that we have to listen to women who come out and make these claims. I understand, but I don't even have to go there with this situation, because what I also know is that the left has a strategy in place that is long-standing. I have no doubt that Brett Kavanaugh, the moment that he was made an appellate judge, that there was one or two or three outside groups that opened the file on him and began to prepare for his Supreme Court nomination hearings. I have no doubt of that, because I know that they keep files, they add to the files, they research the files, they deliver instant. The moment that someone is named to a court, they deliver to the senators instant memos on all of their history. They keep this on a running basis. Most of these groups are funded by George Soros. And so, your listeners shouldn't think that I'm a conspiracy guy. I read the memos. I read their emails back and forth, conferring with the professors, liberal professors at Yale and Harvard and other schools, giving them information, feeding them theories of approach and how to attack a nominee. This is what they do. I know some of your listeners might not believe me, but Republicans are frankly not as clever. We simply do not have that kind of thing. What we have had is success with the Federalist Society and groups in giving advice to the White House and offering and monitoring nominees, but not for the purpose of attacking nominees, for the purpose of promoting them. Brett Kavanaugh is an example of someone who has grown up in the Federalist Society, Neil Gorsuch, another one. But I can tell you that no one on the right has the resources to monitor nominees for the purpose of attacking them. I myself came out in support of Elena Kagan when she was nominated. You know, we just don't operate that way. They operate this way. And so when this accusation came up, I didn't stop to think, should I believe the woman? I understand. I understand that theory. I understand that reaction. I understand. My immediate reaction is, this has been long planned. And when I read that she told the first person about this event in 2012, not in the previous decade, not in the decade before that, but in 2012, she told the first person about this incident, red lights started going on in my mind. And, of course, there's so much similarity with Anita Hill. Here's a liberal professor. Right. Anita Hill was a liberal professor. So these things come about. We used to talk about the noble lie with Anita Hill, that, you know, there were groups that believed that you could lie for a good purpose. And I believe that's what's going on here, to tell you the truth.
You know, one of the things I might point out is this take one of the most liberal justices to actually make it to the court, and that was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but she was confirmed 96-3. So, as you said, it seems to always happen on the Democratic side of the aisle, where they try to vilify individuals, whether it's Judge Robert Bork in 1987, and actually eliminate his nomination. You mentioned, of course, Anita Hill with Clarence Thomas, and now this particular situation with Christine Ford. Again, there seems to be some planning that you alluded to, because she retained a lawyer, which I might just mention is Deborah Katz, who has a history of Democratic activism and is actually one of the ones that spoke in defense of Bill Clinton against the accusations of Paula Jones. And it actually suggested that she take a polygraph and all of the rest. So this does have the look of planning, and if nothing else, just another illustration of one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because you've had a chance to kind of look at the Democratic playbook, and that playbook back in 2002 gives you an indication a little bit of the playbook in 2018. So thank you again for the work that you've done there, and also thank you for clearing this up, because every time you heard people ask the question of Brett Kavanaugh, well, did you know that this was stolen material? I was thinking, wait a minute, category mistake. It wasn't stolen. Yeah. It was accidentally put on a server and was available to you to read. And once individuals read it, it really confirmed what we've always known, and that is any attempt to smear a candidate doesn't just surface spontaneously. It's usually long-term planning where individuals are figuring out how they can attack a particular nominee. So I appreciate you giving us some time today on Point of View and really helping us understand what's behind the scenes. So thanks for pulling back the curtain and telling us all about what was actually taking place back then and probably what's taking place right here today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a break, but just before we do so, let me take some phone calls, because all through the next half hour, I suspect some of you are going to have some comments. So let's go to Arizona first. KNLB. Trina, you'll start us off today with some of your comments. The program's called Point of View. So what is your point of view?
Well, I feel that it's a witch hunt, and they always want to go against moral values or Christian values. And it seems like every time somebody that stands against what they believe, they always want to have a witch hunt or buck against.
Well, again, I think that when we come back from the break, we'll give you some perspective that maybe you haven't already had. And somewhere along the line, I might just even read what some people have put together, 11 reasons to question the veracity of the Kavanaugh accuser. Some of this has to do with the fact that memory isn't always reliable, and that's why I've posted a piece by David French on corroboration is critical because memory is unreliable. And so we'll read some of that, but also have posted some articles that we certainly want to cite as well. But if you'd like to join us, let's give you a chance in this last half hour. Maybe you have some thoughts about this. Should Brett Kavanaugh step down? Some people said just cut the losses and move on. Others have said, as we will read in just a minute from the Wall Street Journal, that there's really no reason to deter from proceeding with a confirmation vote on Brett Kavanaugh. Of course, right now the plan is to have testimony on Monday. And some people off air have told me that they do not think that this particular woman, Christina Blasey Ford, will actually testify. We'll see. If that's the case, we're just postponing the inevitable till Monday rather than having a vote on Thursday, September 20th, when that was originally planned. But if you'd like to join our conversation, maybe you have some thoughts about the accusations, the response. Of course, Brett Kavanaugh said this is completely false. It's a false accusation. I've never done anything like what the accuser describes to her or to anyone. And so he says, I had no idea even who was making this accusation because I don't even know who she is. We'll take a break and take some more of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Go mobile with Point of View and take transformation with you on the go. Search in Google Play or the Apple Store for Point of View Radio, the Point of View Radio mobile app. Download it free today.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills, and these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their health care needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their health care costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those phone calls in just a minute. Maybe some of you think that we should just move on ahead with the confirmation vote. Others maybe say, well, maybe it's time for Brett Kavanaugh to step down. Amy Coney Barrett might be the one that would be the replacement. We'll see where that fits. But I also want to, real quickly, before I take another phone call, mention that we've posted a couple of articles, and one of those by the Wall Street Journal, unless you actually have a subscription to it, may not have read this piece by the editorial board. So we've posted it on our website called the Me Too, or the hashtag Me Too Kavanaugh Ambush. The editorial board says the woman accusing Brett Kavanaugh of a drunken assault when both were teenagers has now come forward publicly, but that should not deter Republicans from proceeding with their current confirmation vote schedule. Well, that changed because now they won't even talk about voting until after there has been some kind of testimony next Monday, which is like a long time away. Why couldn't we just do that tomorrow? But nevertheless, they said there's no way to confirm her story after 35 years, and to let it stop Mr. Kavanaugh's confirmation would ratify what all the earmarks of a calculated political ambush. This is not to say that Christine Blasey Ford isn't sincere in what she remembers. In an interview published in the Washington Post on Sunday, she offered a few more details of the story. She told anonymously starting in July. She said she was 15 when Kavanaugh was 17, and you know the story, so I won't even get into it. She goes on to say, Mr. Kavanaugh denies all of this categorically and unequivocally, and there is simply no way to prove it. The only witness to the event is Mr. Kavanaugh's high school male friend, Mark Judge, who says he recalls no such event. Ms. Ford concedes that she told no one about it, not even a high school girlfriend or family member, until 2012, when she told the story as part of a couple's therapy with her husband. The vagaries of memory are well known, and I'll get into that a little bit later, all the more so when they emerge in the cauldron of a therapy session to rescue a marriage. Experts know that human beings can come to believe firmly over the years something that never did happen or is based on partial truth. The Post reports that the therapist notes from 2012 say there were 4 male assailants, but Mrs. Ford says that was a mistake. Ms. Ford can't recall in whose home the alleged assault took place, how she got there, or how she got home that evening. They say this is simply too distant and uncorroborated a story to warrant a new hearing or to delay a vote. We've heard all 3 principles, and there are no other witnesses to call. The only purpose of another public hearing would be a political spectacle in which Democrats could wax indignant for cameras while Mr. Kavanaugh repeated his denials. And, of course, I pointed out earlier that the lawyer that she hired is one that's had a history of Democratic activism. I spoke in defense of Bill Clinton and a variety of others, but has this particular procedure worked? Well, we already have 2 senators, Senator Jeff Flake and Senator Bob Corker, by the way, they're outgoing senators, who have played into the hands for a delay. Others maybe aren't going to work there as well. And, of course, the issue that is in this article about how Senator Dianne Feinstein waited till the very end, the 11th hour. As a matter of fact, I did not realize that until I read this, that it really did not happen until there was a committee markup for the nomination, where then she said she had information to bring to those individuals. Did not raise that earlier, did not ask any questions of Judge Kavanaugh when they met, only brought it up in the 11th hour. So some very important issues. So let's take some phone calls. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Georgia. Jacob, what do you have on your mind?
Oh, yeah, Kirby. My concern is that we, the evangelicals, don't do to Judge, the judge here now, what we did to Judge Roy Moore when he was up in order to try to become one of our elected officials. And the evangelical body judged him on an allegation without facts. And over from what I hear, over 200,000 evangelical voters would not go out and vote because they judged him on the allegation as though it was true. And Judge Kavanaugh is a threat to the world. He's a threat to the system that is anti-God, anti-Jesus, and anti-Holy Ghost. And the world is coming against him and our president, the greatest president ever lived, and our vice president is because the steps that they see them walking in are the steps that are biblically supported. And they are angry with God for not allowing abortion and same-sex marriage and homosexuality. And so they have gone all out to destroy this great man's reputation and the president and the vice president reputation. And I pray to God that the evangelical world would not judge them on allegation, but that we join together and unite behind this group of people that I believe God has sent to us in order to help us.
Well, appreciate your comments. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Jacob in Georgia, let's take a few more phone calls in just a minute. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. But let me at least address very quickly before we take a break one other article that we have posted. And it's a piece that maybe helps answer some of the questions that some of you have. Because he calls this one, corroboration is critical because memory is unreliable. If you were with me yesterday, you might remember that I pointed out that we don't have any contemporaneous corroboration. In other words, we don't have any statement made by this particular woman at the time. And so as a result, Christine Ford didn't tell anybody until 2012, and so that's really a very important issue. But in this piece, David French says, one of the very few things and first things young litigators learn is that memory is a very, very fickle thing, even memories of traumatic events. He said, in case after case, you'll encounter two opposing litigants who speak with absolute fierce conviction about key events in their lives, and those memories will often diverge almost completely. He said, when I was young and naive, I often thought that it meant that one party was telling the truth, my client, and the other was full of dirty, vicious lies. It didn't take long for me to realize that more often than not, both sides believed their own stories, and the longer the case dragged on, the more they hardened in their positions. That's one reason why good lawyers, when interviewing clients, ask a few simple key questions. Did you take notes of the conversation? Did you tell anyone else what happened? And those kinds of things. He goes on to say, that's one reason why I've been dissatisfied with the declaration, women don't lie about rape. Sure, some small number of women do affirmatively lie, but as a general matter, the word lie is an odd fit for a real-world perceptions that differ and memories are malleable. And by the way, it isn't right-wing denialism, it's scientific fact. And he spends some time quoting from research that was done after the fact. You might remember the Rolling Stone debacle, if you will, where they had this story about a rape taking place, and they used the memory that Jackie had of a memory in the University of Virginia. And later they had various experts go back and evaluate that and say that it was clear that the reporter relied upon the memory that Jackie had, and yet decades of research, they say, quote, have demonstrated that memories are malleable, fragile, and flawed. Memories can be twisted by time. Misinformation can skew people's memories of events, and completely fabricated memories can even be planted in people such that they weave them into the narrative of their lives. And so the point they were making is just because somebody says it, even with conviction, even with tears in their eyes, doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. Matter of fact, they even talked about how sometimes people have implanted memories. In one study, subjects, quote, and I'm putting this with air quotes, remembered details of a surgery that never happened, and how matters as simple as sleep deprivation can impact memory, how even short passages of time can distort recollections, And, of course, he goes into some detail there as well. So his conclusion, that is David French's conclusion, is that, of course, the memory challenges run both ways. His memory may be flawed, hers may be, but if there isn't any corroboration or external evidence outside of Christine Ford's 3 decades old recollections, that's simply not sufficient basis for derailing the nomination of an outstanding jurist, no matter how fiercely they're believed. Let's take a break, and if we can, we'll take some more phone calls. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I know you have some comments about the nomination process, the confirmation process. Love to hear your comments. We'll take those calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Not long ago, we examined Article 6 of the Constitution, which prohibits the application of a religious test for office. The point of this provision is to both prevent the exclusion of religious individuals from office and to ensure good and wise citizens of every stripe can serve the country. Recent Senate confirmation hearings brought Article 6 to the national stage, raising questions of religious liberty. Senator Bernie Sanders questioned nominee Russell Vought over an article in which he examined a passage from the Gospel of John defending the exclusivity of Christ in salvation according to Vaught's Christian faith. Sanders decried Vaught's conclusion that followers of other faiths, and Islam in particular, were condemned according to Vaught's explanation of the Christian faith. I won't debate the theological correctness of Vaught's arguments, but it's worth noting that at the conclusion of questioning, Senator Sanders announced he would vote against Vaught, not over any professional qualification, but because, quote, this nominee is really not someone who is what this country is supposed to be about, unquote. Senators can vote for or against executive nominees for nearly any reason, but for one to publicly question a nominee's religious faith, pronounce it disagreeable, and withhold his vote expressly because of the nominee's faith makes me wonder if, in fact, the senator from Vermont may have created a religious test for office in violation of the Constitution. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be talking about this for some time because the next opportunity for the Senate Judiciary Committee to hear testimony from Judge Kavanaugh or anybody else, it's going to be Monday, so we will probably address a lot of this tomorrow in our Millennial Roundtable and even on our Friday weekend edition. But if you'd like to join our conversation, we give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. We'll head out to California, KYCC. Kathy, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Oh, hi. Good afternoon. Yes, I love listening to this program. I always learn a lot. It's wonderful. And I really feel like you really, tell the truth. And so you're welcome. I was listening to this, and I thought, we ought to just let the Democrats see that this man is innocent and just go through the whole process, because otherwise they're not going to be satisfied if we just go ahead with the nomination without doing this. They may forever say, "Oh, he was guilty," and just they're desperate, because here's a man who's honest. He has true godly principles, Christian values, and they're afraid that he's going to be part of overturning Roe versus Wade and some other issues of one man and one woman type marriage and things like that should be in the law anyway, because that's what people really, a lot of people really want and didn't even have a chance to really express their vote. And so I think it's just a desperate measure, excuse me, on the Democrats to just try and, just because they're afraid that, that this good, godly man is going to get into a position of power, which it is, and it's good. And I say, good. I'm so glad that he's in, and that or will be in, hopefully. And you think about, a 15 and a 17-year-old, they don't have a 25-year-old type brain, adult type brain. But I really think he was totally innocent. Here she's saying, "Oh, I don't even know where it was at, and I don't know how many people were there." And I mean, I'm a survivor from a sexual assault, a real sexual assault. I don't know what she considers a sexual assault, but some people consider inappropriate touching a sexual assault. But this was the full thing of a sexual assault. And I remember to this day, I was 23. My brain wasn't totally developed yet either, but I remember to this day the exact place, the exact time, exactly what happened, I would have remembered how many people were there. So I just, I don't really, some 15-year-olds have an adult type brain, women maybe 23, but I really think that this is just something she's making up, or, it's a faulty memory kind of thing, because this man seems to have they've shown that he really has a lot of integrity. He's a family man, a godly man, a Christian. And I think the whole thing is just made up. Some of the, it's just in her mind. It's vain imagination.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, especially in light of your own circumstances. And to me, the advantage would be for Brett Kavanaugh to deny that in full committee on Monday. My concern is it's going to turn into another circus where whether she shows up or not, and there's some people suggesting now that maybe she won't, that this will not go that direction. But if she doesn't, okay, that's fine. But Christina Ford may or may not show up. But I just am afraid it's just going to be a circus and table pounding and all of the rest. And if indeed we believe that this did not take place, and there's a lot of reason to be skeptical about that, then I still ask the question that Raymond Donovan, who was Secretary of Labor under Ronald Reagan, who was falsely accused and eventually acquitted, said, where do I go to get my reputation back? I mean, this will dog Brett Kavanaugh perhaps for the rest of his life. And before we run out of time, let me just read this that came out through Grabian. I use them sometimes with some of the audio, but I think they've done a good job of trying to summarize what they say are 11 reasons to at least question the veracity, that is, the truthfulness of Kavanaugh's accuser. Number 11, Ford's therapist notes of the incident don't match her current version of the story. That's true. She said 4. The notes say 4. She says 2. Number 10, Ford, by her own admission, has a hazy recollection of the incident. We sort of alluded to that already. She doesn't remember a lot of the details. Number 9, polygraph tests are so unreliable that they're inadmissible in court. As the Wall Street Journal pointed out, the polygraph test merely says she believes the story, but doesn't necessarily mean it was true. Number 8, the allegation wasn't released until Kavanaugh's hearings were over. We've already talked about that in terms of Senator Dianne Feinstein. Number 7, Kavanaugh has successfully passed 6 FBI background checks. Number 6, 65 women who knew Kavanaugh in high school have vouched for his character And I have on other occasions read about who those 65 women are, one of which is Virginia Hume, who it's Britt Hume's daughter, in which she answers some of the criticism that was cited against her. Then we have number 5, the only witness. Witnesses deny her allegation, and I've just mentioned that a minute ago with Mark Judge. Number 4, the haze of alcohol. She says she only had 1 beer. What if she had more? Number 3, deleted her public social media accounts before revealing herself. You have a question, what does she have to hide? Number 2, Ford may have an unrelated grudge against Kavanaugh because, as we pointed out before, his mother, Margaret Kavanaugh, actually was the circuit court judge that ruled against her parents, Ford's parents, which is something people forget about. And then number 1, Ford is a Democrat who donated to left-wing causes, attended an anti-Trump March for Science, and previously signed an open letter challenging Donald Trump's border policy, to mention just a few, along with, of course, as I mentioned, the lawyer Deborah Katz has been a sort of an anti-Trump person as well. So let's see if we can't take one more phone call. We'll head out to Missouri, KNEO. Katie, got about a minute. What would you like to share?
Well, I was telling the young man that I work at a big company, and one of our bosses, because he just tapped the girl. I mean, we all saw it and told her she did a good job. She goes home and tells her husband that he had made advances to her. The company didn't want to have the hassle, and they let him go. And this is what you've got nowadays. You got women, I don't know where they get the idea they've been molested sometimes. It's ridiculous. I mean, if somebody does something that you don't like out of the way, you should say, would you please not do that before you start going off. And I think you should push him through. I think he's got plenty of, and I think, I'm always forgetting the other guy's name that Anita Hill was against. But
Clarence Thomas.
Yes. We went ahead and pushed him through, and he's been a very good judge. So I think you ought to put this man in. He's a good judge. I think this is all ridiculous.
Well, again,
in my own opinion.
And we will have a Millennial Roundtable tomorrow. I know one of the things that Nick Pitts wants to bring up is the disagreement he has with Dennis Prager, who says, something that happened between a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old should not be a disqualifying event for a person that would sit on the Supreme Court. Now, Nick disagrees with that, so he's going to give you kind of a counterpoint on that tomorrow. But it does seem to me that there are some very good reasons to question whether or not this took place. And whether or not this might be a false memory or an exaggerated memory or something that took place, but it wasn't Brett Kavanaugh who was with you at the time. So nevertheless, we'll see where this takes us, and it'll be something, unfortunately, we're going to be talking about for the better part of a week, because it won't even be coming close to a resolution till next Monday. But I hope you appreciated the conversation we've had today. You would certainly want to check out some of these articles we've posted on the website. And so go to the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow on our Millennial Roundtable.
Protect the health of the nation. Join the Point of View Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team. Pointofview.net/team. Or call 800-347-5151.
Good news. You are not stuck with your health care plan. Really. You have a choice, and it's a great one. It's called MediShare, and if you've heard about it and wondered what exactly it is, it's a way that people share their health care bills. And these are people who have a common faith, who want to be part of something beautiful that not only meets their healthcare needs, but the needs of others too. And it's people who love to save money, big time. MediShare members typically save $500 a month per family on their healthcare costs. That is a life changer for people. So this could be for you. Maybe it's what you've been looking for, a way to pay healthcare bills that's not only very smart financially, but it's even profound. MediShare is a nonprofit with 400,000 members nationwide who pray for and share with each other. So yes, you're not stuck. There's another way, and it could save you a lot. Find out more. Call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.